All right, so let's start with the big story that we're tracking on WION at this hour, and this has to do with the US admission that the Americans made a fatal mistake when they launched a drone strike against what the Americans initially claimed was an ISIS Khorasan terrorist in central Kabul. Remember, the drone strike by the Americans had resulted in the death of at least 10 civilians, including 8 children belonging to the same family. It was carried out during the final days of the US troop pullout from Afghanistan last month. And the US Central Command's Commander General Kenneth McKenzie has now finally admitted, after there was mounting evidence, that the strike that the Americans carried out, which they claimed initially was on an ISIS Khorasan terrorist, was actually resulted in the killing of 10 innocent Afghan civilians. Now, the US intelligence had quote-unquote claimed that they had reasonable certainty in terms of the target that they were trying to take down. However, the strike turned out to be what the Americans are now calling a tragic mistake.
I am now convinced that as many as 10 civilians, including up to 7 children, were tragically killed in that strike. Moreover, we now assess that it is unlikely that the vehicle and those who died were associated with ISIS-K or were a direct threat to U.S. forces. I offer my profound condolences to the family and friends of those who were killed. This strike was taken in the earnest belief that it would prevent an imminent threat to our forces and the evacuees at the airport. But it was a mistake, and I offer my sincere apology. As the combatant commander, I am fully responsible for this strike and this tragic outcome.
According to General McKenzie, the US forces had tracked a white car for 8 hours. It was seen near a suspected ISIS Khorasan hideout in Kabul. The American forces claimed that they had received fresh intelligence that the site in question was apparently being used to prepare for attacks on the Kabul International Airport. It was also believed that the car had been loaded with explosives. This is what the Americans were claiming. But the people who died in the American strike include 8 children of one family, and none of the victims were linked to any terror organization, leave alone the Islamic State. In fact, one of those who was killed, the man who was killed, was in fact an Afghan national who had worked for an American aid group. Now, McKenzie defended the US operation as a self-defense strike. He said that there were concerns about an attack on the airport in the last days of the chaotic evacuation. Pentagon and the US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin have also apologized to the relatives of those who were killed.
As the Secretary says in this statement, we apologize, and we will endeavor to learn from this horrible mistake. And to that end, he has directed a thorough review of the investigation just completed by U.S. Central Command.
Now, remember, on the 26th of August, an ISIS Khorasan suicide bomber had killed almost 200 Afghans and about 13 American service personnel just outside the gates of the Kabul International Airport at a time when the Americans were responsible for the security of the airport. The attack had come at a time when many Afghans and also some foreign nationals were trying to make a desperate bid to try and get out of Afghanistan as soon as they could, as they feared the return of the Taliban. So this is what the Americans have finally admitted to after mounting evidence that pointed to the contrary to American claims. Remember, the Americans had initially claimed that they had taken out an ISIS Khorasan terrorist who was on his way to carry out another bombing at the Kabul International Airport. This is what the Americans were claiming, but increasingly there was evidence that clearly suggested that the target that the Americans hit via a drone strike was in fact an innocent family. In fact, WION was a channel that immediately went to the spot where the Americans had carried out the drone strike, and we had investigated into the claims that were made by the Americans, which immediately in the aftermath of the drone strike proved to be completely false. And even questions were being raised within the American media itself, which claimed the veracity of the American claims that the target that the Americans had in fact killed in this case in a drone strike was not an ISIS Khorasan terrorist, but rather was of an innocent family in which about 8 children were killed by the Americans via this drone strike. This is, in fact, a place where a lot of civilians, in fact, lived in central Kabul, and the Americans have now finally admitted to their mistake after mounting evidence. And to give us more insights in terms of what all of this, of course, means, we are joined in by my colleague, Anas Malik, who's joining us live on this broadcast. Good morning to you, Anas. Now, the Americans have finally admitted that the target that they took out via a drone strike was a complete mistake on their behalf. They've regretted it. But you were there on the ground immediately after the Americans had carried out the drone strike, resulting in the death of 10 people. What more do we make of this? And have you had a chance to speak with the family since? And does the family know that the Americans now are indeed admitting that it was a mistake?
Well, the family, as we speak, does not know that the American side has admitted to the admission of guilt or, quote-unquote, the mistake that they have done. I'll be seeing the family in a while from now. The brother of Imarzai, Imal Ahmadi, and when I spoke to him just a very short while back, he had absolutely no clue, though, because he had until like 20 minutes back, he had not been officially communicated, though his other family members and friends and those people from the media, they had been talking to him, and they've sent him messages, they've sent him YouTube links, article links of General McKenzie's press conference where the US side has, or where the CENTCOM has admitted of this mistake or this admission to guilt. But this is nothing new. I was there literally hours later of this strike, and I've said it earlier, we've been covering it from ground at WION, we've been covering it, and to be fair, I've covered conflicts, I've covered bomb blasts, I've covered bombings, but there was nothing like what was being said in the Pentagon press release, contrary to what we saw on the ground. It was all contrary to what was being said in the Pentagon press release. For instance, it said that there was an ISK militant who was targeted. The family said, in fact, it was corroborated by neighbors as well, that Imarzai had nothing to do with the family. Then with the IS. Then the second thing was that there was a car laden of explosives, and then the fact that civilian casualties were a result of a secondary explosion. Well, when I was there, I could not smell anything closer to explosives. All I could smell was the sensation of human flesh being burned, and that was the only thing that was in the air in Khwaja Bogra area on the morning of 30th of August, just hours later when this US drone strike had struck. Then the US side had said that there were 2 explosions, one that was caused by the missile from the drone, and the second that was caused by the explosive that were in the car. That was negated again by locals, which said that there was only 1 explosion and there were not 2 explosions. Imarzai worked as an engineer in a California-based charity firm, and he had been there for 17 years. He had international travel history as well. 7 children, 3 of them belonging to Imarzai, and the other 4 belonging to his cousin and his brother, lost their lives. In order, 10 people lost their lives, 3 adults, 7 children, and all goes unaccounted for. Last week when I spoke to Imal Ahmadi, the brother of Imarzai, he said that he was seeking justice and he would use quote-unquote social media platforms to seek justice, because A, the US does not have any military or diplomatic presence, and B, nobody from the US side had as yet until then contacted him with regards to this inquiry. And even now, as I said 20 minutes back when I spoke to him, he had gotten to know about his brother's innocence, something that he had been rallying about through social media or through digital media or through those news article links. Saleh?
Absolutely, indeed. Now, this of course, is not the first time that the Americans have carried out a bombing of this nature in which they've ended up killing innocent people. The Americans have done this before. Of course, Americans pat their back, saying that they were some kind of a liberating force in Afghanistan the 2 decades that they were there. But in incidents like this, where there is, what Americans describe as collateral damage, where innocent civilians are killed in these drone attacks, what perception does this create amongst the common people in Afghanistan for Americans having carried out these type of deadly drone attacks in which innocent civilians are killed?
Well, the sentiment that these sort of attacks originate is the sentiment of hate and that is beyond any doubt. And that is one thing that the Taliban had been banking on, this sentiment of hate that was being originated in common people as well. And you rightly mentioned these strikes which quote-unquote target wrong people or have collateral damage. They've been out in numbers, be in Pakistan, the adjoining neighbor, or in Afghanistan. We've seen madrasas being targeted, innocent houses being targeted, vehicles being targeted, children who were playing, they are killed as a result of this collateral damage. So that originates that sentiment of hate which used to bolster the Taliban's position for the fact that they were fighting enemy and invader forces, and people still in the villages, they abide by what the Taliban had to say. So by and large, this is nothing new. But one thing that is very critical and very important to note over here, that the strike took place in the capital city of Kabul. This was the first of its kind strike in the 20-year-old long war on terror. And because it was in proximity to the media, it was accessible to the common to media, be that international, local. Therefore, the pressure on the U.S. side mounted. When we first reported, and we saw reactions coming in from the U.S., the pressure kept on mounting, and the reason they were compelled to or forced to this admission of guilt, had this been in some place else except for Kabul, it would have been really difficult for the US to walk back on its own claim, because we've seen that happening in the past. As I said, you've rightly mentioned that civilians have been targeted, or there have been civilian casualties, as what they call collateral damage, but barely, or rather rarely, we've seen such investigations and such admissions of guilt having taken place.
Absolutely,
Saleh.
indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Anas, for joining us from Kabul and getting us all those insights. So this, of course, is a rare admission by the Americans. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.